What happens when honesty enters a classroom? When the simple act of telling the truth challenges authority? When education becomes uncomfortable for those in power? Our story begins right there, in a place you might think is dedicated to truth above all else. This all unfolded within a public education system. You know the type. Resources are always tight, the rulebook is thicker than any textbook, and a school's reputation often seems more important than actual reform. It's a system where appearances can mean everything. In this system, we have a teacher, someone with years of experience under their belt. For this teacher, it wasn't just a 9-to-5 job, it was a profound responsibility. Every student was treated with genuine care and respect. The classroom was a sanctuary built on trust. But outside that classroom door, the school operated differently. Policies were rigid, handed down from distant administrative offices. Questioning these top-down decisions wasn't just discouraged. It was seen as a problem. Compliance was the name of the game. Just follow the script. Over time, this dedicated teacher started noticing things that just didn't add up. There were significant gaps in the curriculum that were just being ignored year after year. Certain school facilities were clearly unsafe, but no one seemed to be in a hurry to fix them. And most importantly, when students raised valid concerns, they were often politely dismissed, their voices fading into the administrative background noise. It went deeper than that. The teacher began to see discrepancies in the school's official records. Reports were being filed that painted a picture of incredible progress. A picture that simply didn't match the reality in the classrooms. Attendance numbers looked a little too perfect. Test score improvements seemed almost magical. It was a carefully constructed illusion, designed to hide the real state of affairs. So, the teacher decided to act, but cautiously and professionally. Concerns were raised internally, through the proper channels. The conversations were calm, respectful. There were no wild accusations, no pointing fingers. The goal was simple. Let's work together to make things better for the students. The administrators listened, or at least they appeared to. They nodded politely. They promised to look into it, but then? Nothing, no action followed. The meetings would end, the doors would close, and the very same issues would remain, untouched and unresolved. The system was designed to absorb and neutralize concern, not to act on it. Meanwhile, the students continued to struggle. The promised resources never materialized. The broken facilities remained broken. The same empty promises were repeated at the start of each new school year, a cycle of hollow hope. For the teacher, a serious internal conflict was brewing. To stay silent felt dishonest, a betrayal of the very students they were there to serve. The sense of responsibility started to outweigh the fear of reprisal. A difficult decision was on the horizon. Finally, the teacher decided to escalate. The concerns were shared more formally, this time with meticulously prepared documentation. Every fact was double-checked, every claim verified. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a clear, evidence-based appeal for transparency and change. The intention was to solve problems, not to create them. The response from the administration was immediate, but not in the way you might hope. It was subtle at first. The tone of conversations shifted. A professional distance suddenly appeared where there was once collegial warmth. The quiet network of support that every teacher relies on began to weaken, to fray at the edges. Then came the quiet whispers, the indirect questions. Questions about the teacher's loyalty were raised in closed-door meetings. Their motives were cast into doubt. Why is this person causing so much trouble? The act of telling the truth was being reframed as an act of disruption. Maintaining order, even a flawed order, was prioritized over addressing the actual problems. The teacher could feel the atmosphere changing. The classroom remained a safe haven, a bubble of learning and trust. But the hallways, the staff lounge, the entire environment outside that room began to feel hostile. It was becoming clear that speaking the truth carried a heavy price. This story was no longer just about a single teacher in a single school. It started to reflect a much larger, systemic issue. A system that actively resists accountability. A system that silences uncomfortable truths to protect itself. The machine was designed to expel any part that didn't move in perfect, silent synchrony. The teacher now stood at a critical turning point. There were two paths. One was to fall silent, to protect their job, their career, their livelihood. The other was to continue speaking out, to keep fighting for the students, no matter the personal cost. What happened next would reveal the true price of honesty in a system that fears it. The battle for the soul of a school had just begun. A report about something that needed to be addressed for the sake of the students. But that feeling didn't last long. The atmosphere in the school began to change, almost overnight. Administrators who were once friendly and supportive suddenly became distant, their conversations clipped and cautious. Every interaction felt measured, controlled. The trust that had been built over years started to evaporate like morning mist. Soon the teacher noticed a shift in professional dynamics. Unannounced classroom visits, which used to be supportive check-ins, now felt like inspections. Suddenly minor, insignificant classroom management details were magnified and documented. Years of dedication, late hours spent preparing lessons, and a proven track record of student success seemed to vanish from memory. It was as if the past had been erased, and a new, unflattering narrative was being written. The message was subtle but clear: "You're being watched." Then came the instructions. Vague directives would land in an email, with expectations that seemed to change daily without any clear explanation. When the teacher tried to ask for clarification, the questions were met with dismissive answers or, worse, silence. It became obvious that questions were not welcome. Compliance was expected, not collaboration. The professional dialogue that is so vital in education had been replaced by a one-way street of confusing demands. The tension was palpable, and colleagues could feel it too. A few brave souls would offer a quiet word of support in an empty hallway, a knowing glance across the staff room. But most kept their distance. Fear is contagious, and the unspoken message was to not get involved. They had their own careers, their own families to think about. The isolation began to set in, a lonely island in a sea of familiar faces. Meetings, once a place for open discussion, became deeply uncomfortable. The teacher's input, once valued, was now politely ignored or cut short. It felt like walking into a play where the final act had already been decided. Decisions were presented as final, with no room for genuine discussion. The whole process felt like a charade, a performance of protocol without any substance. And then, the formal written notice arrived. It was cold and bureaucratic, filled with references to general school policies and obscure clauses from the handbook. But it never addressed the specific concerns the teacher had originally raised. The very issue that started this whole chain of events was conspicuously absent. It was a masterful piece of administrative sidestepping. How do you defend yourself against shadows? How do you argue against accusations that are never clearly stated? Faced with this, the teacher chose a path of calm professionalism. The response was measured and respectful, restating the facts and consistently bringing the focus back to what truly mattered: the well-being and education of the students. It was an appeal to their shared mission as educators. But the response was met with a wall of indifference. It was reviewed, filed, and ultimately dismissed. The system wasn't interested in dialogue. It was interested in closing a chapter it found inconvenient. The stress began to take a heavy toll. Each school day was followed by a wave of mental and emotional exhaustion. Sleep offered little rest, as anxious thoughts raced through the night. The quiet, creeping anxiety became a constant companion. The only place where things still made sense, the only refuge from the storm, was inside the four walls of the classroom. There, with the students, the mission was still clear. And the students, with their sharp intuition, noticed the change. They could sense the energy shift. They'd ask if everything was okay. Despite the immense pressure from outside, the teacher made a conscious effort to keep that space sacred. The care, the passion, the the dedication to teaching never wavered. The lessons continued, the smiles were genuine, and the commitment to their learning remained sincere. That was the one thing the pressure couldn't touch. But the system had other ways of applying pressure. The workload suddenly inexplicably increased. A mountain of new administrative tasks appeared, pointless paperwork that seemed designed to consume time and energy. This relentless busy work chipped away at precious hours that should have been spent preparing engaging lessons or providing extra help to students. The goal seemed to be exhaustion, to wear down the will to fight. Whispers started to circulate. In the absence of clear information, rumors filled the void. Open conversations were replaced by hushed tones and sideways glances. The teacher's reputation, built on years of hard work and integrity, began to erode. Being honest was being reframed as being difficult. The isolation deepened, a painful consequence of speaking a truth that made others uncomfortable. Through this entire ordeal, the system revealed its true nature. Accountability was skillfully avoided, and the truth was treated as an unwelcome guest. The primary goal was not to solve the problem, but to restore order and silence the disruption, even if that meant silencing a dedicated professional. Looking back, despite the personal cost, the sleepless nights, and the crushing sense of isolation, the teacher felt no regret. To have stayed silent would have been a betrayal of the fundamental responsibility of an educator. It would have meant choosing comfort over conscience. Integrity remained the one anchor in a turbulent sea. Fear, in the end, did not win. This part of the story isn't about dramatic confrontations. It's about a quiet, methodical campaign of suppression. No wrongdoing was ever proven against the teacher. No resolution to the original issue was ever offered. There was only the steady, unrelenting pressure, a clear message sent without ever having to be spoken aloud. As the days turned into weeks, the teacher could sense an endgame approaching. The feeling of job security, once taken for granted, now felt fragile and uncertain. The cost of honesty was becoming painfully clear. The next stage, whatever it might be, would define everything. It would be the final test of a system's values and a teacher's resilience. This story isn't just about one teacher. It is about a choice that professionals in all fields sometimes face, the choice between speaking up and staying silent. It highlights the immense courage it takes to hold on to your principles when the system pushes back. The final decision arrived without a sound. There was no open meeting, no public debate. Just a brief, sterile notice that reclassified a teacher's position. Imagine walking out of a building you've called a second home for the last time, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the air. The teacher left calmly, a quiet exit from a place filled with memories. A profound silence seeped into the space that was once filled with learning and laughter, a void where a voice used to be. This story isn't just about one person. It's a reflection on a system. It's about what happens when inconvenient truths meet institutional resistance. Let's explore this journey, the personal cost of integrity, and why stories like this are crucial for the future of education. Once outside the familiar school gates, life felt unreal, suspended in uncertainty. The rhythm of daily life, the comforting routine of bells and lesson plans, was abruptly shattered. Almost immediately, the practical worries began to creep in. How will the bills get paid? Where will the next paycheck come from? The stability that had been a foundation for so long was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety about the future. The search for a new job was a humbling and often painful process. Every application, every interview was shadowed by the same unspoken questions. The teacher's reputation, once a source of pride, now felt fragile, easily misinterpreted. It became clear that speaking the truth, standing up for what was right, carried a heavy and lasting price. Each rejection felt like another confirmation that the system preferred compliance over courage. It was a lonely road, navigating a professional world that seemed wary of anyone who had dared to rock the boat. The initial shock and fear started to recede, making way for deep reflection. The mistake was not theirs to own. The problem wasn't the act of speaking up, but the environment that couldn't bear to listen. With this newfound clarity, the teacher began to see a larger, more troubling pattern. This wasn't an isolated incident. All across the country, countless educators face similar pressures, similar choices. The comfort of the status quo is frequently prioritized over the genuine care and well-being of the people they are meant to serve, in this case, the students. It's a quiet systemic silencing, where individuals who challenge the norm are pushed to the margins, their voices muffled to maintain an illusion of harmony. This realization was both disheartening and empowering. It wasn't a personal failure. It was a symptom of a much larger issue. Despite the professional loss, the financial strain, and the emotional toll, something essential remained unbroken. The core purpose, the very reason for becoming a teacher in the first place, was still intact. The passion for imparting values, for fostering critical thinking, for shaping young minds, that fire had not been extinguished. And perhaps most importantly, self-respect survived. In the quiet moments of reflection, there was no regret for doing the right thing, only a somber understanding of the consequences. This internal strength became an anchor in the storm, a reminder that titles and positions are temporary, but character is enduring. So, why does this one story matter so much? Because education is not just about memorizing facts or passing tests. When we silence the truth in our schools, we harm our students first and foremost. We teach them a dangerous lesson, that compliance is more valuable than courage, that silence is safer than integrity. Accountability is not a threat, it's what protects growth. When we fail to hold our systems accountable, we fail the very children we promised to nurture. They are not just tales of loss. They are calls to action. They remind us to actively support the brave educators in our communities who put their students' welfare above their own comfort. They urge us to question decisions that seem unfair or opaque, to demand transparency from those in power. And most of all, they compel us to champion the value of truth in every learning space. The courage of one teacher can feel like a small, isolated act, but when we stand with them, this was a story from a time we hope is long gone, a memory we keep alive so that it is never repeated. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on its message. Think about the teachers who made a difference in your life, the ones who taught you to think for yourself. Let's stand together for those who speak up for others, because their courage is a shield that protects us all. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.